Once the great and powerful Supreme Court has spoken, it's usually the final word. But following the High Court's controversial Massachusetts buffer zone decision, state leaders are looking for maybe a legal loophole. In a unanimous decision, the Supreme Court ruled that requiring pro-life activists to stay at least 35 feet away from reproductive health facilities violates their First Amendment rights. Today, Governor Deval Patrick and other state leaders announced plans to craft legislation that would preserve a measure of privacy for women seeking treatment. Here to discuss the legal options on the table, Marty Walz. She is the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood of Massachusetts, and we're so glad that you could be with us this.
Great to be with you.
Great to see you today. I, like so many people, just like what I just said, felt that if the Supreme Court makes a decision, then so be it. We can't rock the boat. That is the truth, but maybe not. Can you explain that to us?
Well, the Supreme Court has issued its decision about the constitutionality of our state's buffer zone law, so they are the final word. So as we're beginning to craft new legislation, it will not contain a buffer zone, because the Supreme Court has said it's unconstitutional. So we're looking at other options that we think the court will consider to be constitutional. But we know what it can't say, and the court has made that clear. So that's why we're looking for other options.
So you met today to inform the public that that's what's happening. Tell me a few of those laws that you're looking at as you start to craft this piece of legislation.
The Supreme Court gave us a roadmap, so we are looking at the laws that the Supreme Court told us to look at, one of which is a dispersal statute. There are laws in other communities that allow the police to disperse crowds under certain circumstances. So we're looking at, should we have a dispersal law at reproductive health care facilities to make sure that patients and staff can get into the door through the crowds of the protesters. So that's an example that the court suggested we look at, so of course that we're looking at it. Another law that the court cited is a law from New York City which prohibits people from following others within 15 feet of a reproductive health care center. So we're also looking at that. So the court said these are the kinds of laws that we want the state legislature to look at and put into place to enhance safety. So we're going to take the court and do what they suggested.
But Marty, it's going to have to be pretty specific because the last laws they were saying were really too broad.
That's right. So the court said that the law that we had before was not narrowly tailored enough. So we are now narrowly tailoring the proposals that we're looking at. So make sure that we don't run afoul of the court's ruling.
Is it fair to say that the court's ruling was not necessarily about abortion, but more about free speech?
That's right. This was not a case about abortion. It was a case about public safety and free speech and balancing those two concerns. Most of the patients who come to Planned Parenthood are not seeking abortion services. They're seeking birth control, they're seeking cancer screenings or testing and treatment for sexually transmitted diseases. And all of those patients are subjected to the kind of protests as well. So it's much less about abortion and much more about the balance of free speech and public safety.
Sure. Now, I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you are certainly in support of free speech.
Yes, of course.
So tell me how it is that you think that these activists who are outside, how their free speech can be protected as you draft this law.
They have every right to be on the public sidewalk speaking, just the way people who support Planned Parenthood's work have every right to be on the public sidewalk speaking. So that's really not the issue. The issue is the intense harassment that our patients and our staff experience. That's where the free speech crosses the line. Or the following somebody, screaming at them, following them all the way to their car, or following them right up into the doorway, being right in their face, inches away from them. That's where it goes from free speech into what may be criminal behavior, and that's what we're getting at.
Well, let me tell you, that leads in very well to something I want to show you. Last week, a pro-life advocate was a guest on this show. Her name was Bridget Fay, and she talked about what she refers to as sidewalk counseling. Let's listen.
When your goal is to try to persuade women to not have abortions, screaming at them doesn't help. They're scared, they're often very young, they feel like they don't have other alternatives.
So she's saying, essentially, that that's not happening on the sidewalk.
Well, some people do try to talk to our patients quietly. They're not the norm. Almost all of the protesters are very aggressive, yelling, following our patients, even when our patients and staff ask them to be let alone. So on Saturday, we had a woman who literally stepped into Commonwealth Avenue into traffic to get away from a protester who was following her, even after she asked him to stop. So he was trying to force his conversation on her. That's not the quiet counseling that woman talked about. That's the kind of harassment that's much more common. And the First Amendment applies to everybody. So we have to find a way to allow the quiet conversation, but not allow the intense harassment that is really much more normal. It is very unusual to have someone out front of our health centers engaging in quiet conversation.
Marty, you just hit the nail on the head. I wanted to ask you about the mood since this ruling has come down, and I think you've given us a sense of what went on this past weekend.
Yeah, we had a large group of protesters on Saturday, and we had a higher number than normal of patients not keep their appointments. So the protesters were successful in depriving women of access to health care, and that's what we're so concerned about. Our patients are not getting the care they need because the protesters are scaring them, and that's why a new law is required. Women deserve access to cancer screenings. Women need access to birth control. But the protesters are preventing that from happening.
And let me ask you, if in fact you do get a piece of legislation passed, there's a great possibility it too will be challenged. Are you ready for that long haul?
Of course. Planned Parenthood has been around for nearly 100 years, and I'm quite confident that we're going to be open and caring for patients no matter whether the protesters sue us or don't sue, whether they challenge the law or not. We're going to be caring for patients no matter what.
Marty Walz, thank you very much. We're glad you could be with us today.